Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker, and my good friend Jacob Hansen is back here on the show to discuss a very interesting program that he was appeared on recently, and that's Alex O'Connor's program. It was probably one of the better known public atheists and probably one of the more thoughtful public atheists out there, who's very influential, especially in the internet world. Jacob, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve.
So I was able to watch. So I know that were talking with him, and so then the video itself got released yesterday, and it's as of right now it has well over 100,000 views and like closing in on 5,000 comments, and
Yeah,
so it's
the
amazing.
comments have been kind of wild just because his normal videos, I actually was wondering like what does the comment ratio look like compared to his other videos? And most of his videos are around like, I don't know, 800, 1,200 comments total, and this one's already in one day at like 4,000. So people are definitely have things to say about it.
Yeah, and actually I want to get to that, but before we actually get to talking about the interview itself, I actually want to just talk about the background on the events leading up to this interview happening. Now we're taping this on Tuesday, March 11th, 2025, and I'm planning on releasing this later today. The episode itself was released on YouTube yesterday, on the 10th. I guess there was a audio one that came out a few days before. Jacob, the first time you encountered Alex was when you did that Jubilee video where it was like 25 against one, 25 Christians. Some would say maybe 23 Christians versus one atheist. So maybe just talk a little bit about how that all happened, and then your engagements with Alex that eventually
Yeah.
led to the interview.
Yeah, so it was funny because we didn't know who was going to be on the show for the 25 Christians versus one atheist. I had suspected that it was going to be Alex O'Connor. He's kind of the most prominent voice in the atheist world right now. And so I spent a week or so like consuming everything I could on Alex O'Connor's content to try and prepare myself for Jubilee. And when he walked in, it was funny. Everybody cheered in the room. All the Christians did because there's such respect for Alex.
Yeah.
Alex is someone who I think is a great example of how to be an opponent without being an enemy, and very sort of he wants to engage with the best arguments from each side instead of kind of straw manning people. So that happened. We end up uh, in it, and during the Jubilee episode you kind of get your one shot. That's kind of what it very much appeared that, just so everyone knows, the whole running up to the chair thing, that's actually staged. They did it originally. Originally, they did have it where you run up to the chair and like the first person there gets to speak, but they had people like literally get hurt in doing that. So they were like, we're just gonna do it now where we'll like pick somebody. So basically, everyone would get a chance to go up against Alex for however long. And so I got my shot. It was great. It was fun. I thought me and Hayden did well, the two Latter-day Saints in the group. And then he got to pick someone to go against him where he would get to ask them like hard questions essentially. And he picked me. And I was excited about it. I thought that was awesome. And so we do that, and I think it went fairly well. We went back and forth around the problem of evil and some of that. And then afterwards, I was already thinking like, wow, this has been so great. This has been so cool. He comes up to me and says, hey, some of us are going to go get some food afterwards. Do you want to come with? And I was like, it's kind of like, I don't know. You kind of imagine that one of your heroes, you meet your hero and you think it's kind of cool. And then they're like, hey, you're really cool. You want to go hang out? So I was totally fanboying, and it was pretty funny.
That
But
would
we
be
went,
my John DeLynn moment when that happened to me.
exactly, something like that. And so yeah, so we go to this like kind of bar and restaurant place, and I end up just kind of by chance. There were quite a few of us there. He invited quite a few of the people that were at the Jubilee thing. And I ended up sitting right across from him just kind of by chance, which was really cool. So I literally spent like 4 hours talking with Alex O'Connor with these other Christians. about all sorts of stuff. And it was just a great conversation. He was super genuine. And as I kind of got to know him more personally, like just a genuine good dude. Um, and ended up staying until like closing time, and I was one of the last people there, and so we got a picture together, and it was just really cool. And I can't remember, how did the interview, I think I had reached out and had said something like, "Hey, Alex, it's great meeting you." Like the next day, I was like, "If you ever want to have a
Actually,
conversation," oh, go ahead.
before we get to that, I just have a few more questions about your
Yeah,
initial interactions. Also, so at this point, yes, so at the very end, you get to, and you didn't even know, actually, you just had a hunch that it was going to be Alex, and that's why you studied. So you
yeah.
didn't, okay, so you just had a hunch, and it was a good hunch, and so you were able to study up on him, and that was cool. Now, I know that in during the thing when you announced that you were a Latter-day Saint and how that's like the best explanations or whatever, there was a little bit of groaning from the Christians. I want to hear from what the kind of interactions you had with them, like maybe not so much during the program, but maybe afterwards. What kind of response and reception did you get from them?
So it's funny. There definitely was a like this, because I my claim was that the restored gospel Mormonism provides the most logically coherent sort of theology out there. And obviously they all gasped and were like, they didn't even, I don't think they even knew I was a Latter-day Saint. And by the way, as I went up to make that statement, so we had to write down a statement we were willing to defend because we might get chosen. I put that one down, but I was kind of like, they're not going to ask. Like, what's the chance they're going to pick me out of the 25? And when I was walking up there, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in front of like 10 million people, and like everyone that's like Christian is going to watch this. Like, am I actually going to like say this publicly with all these people in the room? And I remember I walked up and I was like, I remember thinking to myself, I was like, let's do it. Like, here we go. Like, game on. Um, but afterwards there was a little bit of like, oh, this guy. But there was one guy, Randall Deeb, who ended up going on Ward Radio with us afterwards and stuff. He came up and talked to me and Hayden, and we had a great interaction. And then when we went to that dinner with all the other Christians, and I kind of got talking, and we kind of they loosened up, and they still disagreed, but they realized I'm not some like hater. And I right there was like, I told him at the dinner table, like, I hope you guys are successful. Like, I hope you guys win against Alex. Like, I want people to become believers in Christ, even if they don't follow my tradition. I think they're moving in the right direction when, they're a Catholic or a Protestant or Orthodox or something else. I want to make sure they're aware of that. And they kind of loosened up, and we had our little theological things that went back and forth, which was fun. And I also think Alex in that was kind of, he mentioned later, there was something I brought up. I asked them about, where's Jesus's body after the resurrection? Because they kind of, it's sort of a Christian thing is to sort of be like, the Father has a body? That's so laughable. Like, he's just out there somewhere in the universe. I'm like, what about Jesus? Like, he has a body. Like, where's he at? And then they're like, oh, well. And Alex, when I had asked some of those questions, Alex was watching, and he was kind of like, it was funny because he kind of pointed at them and be like, whoa, like, what are you guys going to say to that? You know what I mean? And so there was kind of this funny dynamic of like him seeing the Latter-day Saint sort of take on certain Christian things that he had never really heard before. And it caused him to kind of, oh, that's interesting. And I think that was one of the things that he realized, like, oh, wait a minute, there's some really kind of fascinating things going on here that are interesting in the religious conversation generally, I think.
Yeah, and I think that that's really probably what ultimately led to doing this interview is because I think as a philosopher, as somebody who's a student of theology and really somebody who's just really genuinely curious about these things, I think that it was just a natural unfolding for you to go on that program.
Yeah, and I think that's and Alex is genuinely curious. Now, one of the things he is obviously genuinely curious about is how the heck do you guys deal with sort of these historical criticisms and controversies, which were so one of the disappointing aspects of this conversation that I had with him. I mean, there's a lot that I really did enjoy it and things were great, was that we didn't really get to talk about the theology of the restoration, which in my mind, I look at it like the history is the hard part. Anytime you're talking about miraculous history, like for the Christians, the hard thing is sort of some of the historical claims that you make about the Exodus or about, this is something that's common to all of us, is we have to deal with our history. But when you deal theologically, you end up realizing that's where the real strength is. And so I was disappointed that we didn't get more time to talk about that with him. But we did get to talk about some of that kind of at the dinner. But he did mention that maybe we could have another discussion, and my hope would be if we did that would be the subject, is more the theological view.
Well, just based on the response he's getting, I'm sure you'll be making a repeat appearance on that program. And so, your interactions with him. So, does it start with you just started emailing each other, and did he have questions for you? And also do you feel like your appearance on Jubilee is what ultimately caused him to say that of any sect that I would join of Christianity, it would be Mormonism? Do you think that had some influence on that statement?
I think so. It obviously, like, I Alex does not know enough to even make that claim, but what he did do is he realizes that, hey, I heard this Mormon guy make some very interesting claims against the Christians at this dinner. I'm going to razz these guys by saying I'll choose Mormonism, just to kind of give them the, hey, and I wanted my conversation with Alex in general, I didn't want it to be like, I'm going to prove Mormonism to you. It was more that I think we deserve a place at the conversation table amongst the Christian world. Like, you can disagree, that's fine, but to just sort of just write us off, a lot of times when Christians do that, they engage in a double standard.
Yeah.
They do what atheists do, where they just sort of, atheists like, oh, the Bible, that's just some silly book about human sacrifice and talking donkeys. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, there's a side to which it's like, yeah, it is kind of based around a human sacrifice, and there is a talking donkey in it. So it's like, and so just a quick preface before I get into the email side of it, and like what we talked about and how it came about. I'm a big believer that I actually don't like to talk about Mormonism per se with people who are atheists. And that goes for a lot of Exmos as well, because I don't think that you get to Mormonism without Christianity. It's sort of like, I use the analogy of like talking about maybe calculus without algebra, right? The I have this analogy of 3 levels of conversation, right? You have a belief in God. That's the first level of conversation. We're talking about, is there a God? Is there some kind of a higher power? The next is your belief in Jesus Christ. Okay, if you believe in God, you've now moved to level 2. You're now trying to decide, who is this God? Has he ever shown up anywhere? Like, does he interact with the world in any way? What are the different theories for God's interaction with the world? And I think the Christian story, and you, I think, would agree, is an incredibly compelling, of the options available, story about that. So let's say you come to place your faith in Jesus Christ. Now comes the question where we ask, well, what about Jesus, and what does he want from us? How do we follow him? What is the nature of this church in the New Testament? And that's sort of the conversation at which sort of Mormonism comes into the picture, because and so unless I always say this, I'll talk to an atheist about Mormonism if they're willing to grant Christianity first, right? If they're willing to grant that God exists, and that just for the sake of conversation, now I think we can start to have a conversation about it. But with Alex, I kind of broke that rule to a certain extent, just because it's such a huge opportunity. So I emailed him and I basically said, hey, Alex, if you ever want to have a conversation, I'd be happy to come on your show and discuss Mormonism. You had meant, you said that you're fascinated about it or whatever. And then he reached back out and said to me, yes, but he said, but I'd like to look and see if there's someone else that is a more like prominent LDS scholar who could potentially come and talk about it. Now he did bring on Dan McClellan,
Mm-hmm.
but he didn't bring on Dan McClellan to talk about the church, because I don't think Dan McClellan wants to ever talk about the church, or the fact that know that he believes in any of it. Or at least I've never heard him say why or testify or anything like that in a public space, which fine, fair enough. He just wants to stick to his scholarship. But um, no other, I think there were no other scholars that really were interested in doing it.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I really feel like you guys missed out when Christopher Hitchens was touring the country, and just about every other evangelical apologist out there was out there to debate him, and then it was crickets from Utah. I wish that was happening now, and you could have had the opportunity to have a conversation with
Well,
Christopher. And
I wouldn't, but I would not debate Christopher Hitchens on
actually,
Mormonism.
but see, let me step back a little bit here because I think it's really interesting that you make the comment you would not do this with an atheist. I make the argument, and in Christopher Hitchens even makes the argument on some level, that atheism is just a branch of Protestantism taken to its logical extreme, especially Western-based atheism. And
Mm.
so, and even Christopher says, I am an atheist of the Protestant variety.
Mhm.
So I think that you can engage atheists in their worldview because it's still steeped in a Christian worldview, even if they're atheists, because they come from a Christian society and civilization. And Alex is a product of that Christian civilization.
I agree in this sense, though. If I'm talking about, if I were, I would have a conversation, I would have what I call a level one conversation with an atheist. I'd love to do that. I would debate Alex on the existence of God. Like if he offered me that, I would debate him on it. But that's not talking about Mormonism. That's talking about theism. You know what I'm saying? And if we're talking about, and if someone is a theist, or if you wanted to talk about Christianity, right? Like there's this framework where we have to realize that Mormonism exists within this sort of broader notion of the Christian movement. I know people say we're not Christian, but we are part of whatever the broadest sense of what Christianity is a Jesus movement. Like we're definitely part of that. Um, and so again, Mormonism is a specific narrative about Christianity, but there's more fundamental issues that go like when I had my sort of faith remodeling and I really needed to come to believe like why do I believe in God? I didn't go read church sources. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints spends very little time making any sort of arguments ever about the existence of God. And to some extent, I'm totally fine with that because I think that tons of other Christians and people in history have been doing that. And so that's not our game. And by the way, it's the reason that you remember, like back in the day, we used to go to Europe and baptize people by the boatloads.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can't baptize anyone.
Right.
Why? It's because you want to know who Mormonism speaks to? It speaks to Christians who
Yes.
are disaffected with the creedal tradition.
I agree
So
with that. Yeah, that's true.
So, because that's what Mormonism is. It's a commentary on the nature of Christ's church in modern times. Like, what is it? Where is it? If you don't believe in Christ to begin with, or even God, like we got to go so far back down to like the beginning of the conversation before we get to Mormonism. We got to talk about theism. We got to talk about Christianity, and then we can start to get to the unique things that are unique to the Latter-day Saint tradition.
You know, Jacob, one of the things that's really interesting to me that particularly among males, over the course of the last few years, we have seen a shift of males tended to be the atheists and females tend to be more believers. We're now seeing a shift where males are coming back into faith. And I remember talking to Dr. Jordan Cooper a couple of years ago, and he was on my program. We were talking off camera, and he had just brought up, "Oh yeah, Jordan Peterson just started following me on Twitter." I'm like, "Oh wow, that's cool." And I said, "What do you think about Jordan Peterson?" And I told him, I said, "I think you could argue he's one of the one of the most influential Christian." Um, Theologians in the world or Christian
Yep.
advocates in the world. And he says, I'd have to agree with that. He says that because there's been a lot of young men that have come back into faith because of Jordan Peterson.
Yep.
Also, you have the, I just saw that the apostate prophet who was a Muslim, ex-Muslim who became an atheist, recently got baptized into the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Yep. I
So,
was super happy about that, by the way. Just so
and
everyone
that's
knows. Go
that,
Orthodox. I want people to be baptized in these churches.
yeah,
You
yeah.
ain't gonna
I'm the
join mine.
same.
Go join one of the other ones.
Exactly. That's my whole thing is like, hey, that's really cool that that happened. And so you're seeing even hardcore atheists finding faith in Christ. So I think it's important that you and people like myself engage the atheist world. I've had Michael Shermer on of Skeptic Magazine. I've had Aaron Ra on, who's one of the biggest atheists on YouTube.
Mhm.
And that's almost from the beginning of the channel. I've been engaging atheists because I feel like they're part of this conversation. And they have become part of this conversation. And I think we go back 20 years ago, we'd never imagined that this kind of stuff would be happening, where we're seeing prominent atheists going back into faith.
And the Jordan Peterson effect is absolutely real. And here's what it is. People are engaging. What conversation level is Jordan operating at? Is he talking about which denomination is true? No. He in fact he gets out of that conversation as quickly as he can every time. He pushes the conversation back down to level 1. Because here's what a lot of people have found. New atheism sort of deconstructed level 1 and 2 more, or like I'm sorry, level 2 3 and 2, like the higher levels, right? And then everyone ended up back down and sort of, then they were like, well, wait a minute, if like what do I believe now? Like they kind of hit this nihilistic hole. How do I ground morality? How do I, and they begin to have all these sort of practical problems. I've often said about atheism, my thing with atheism, when I'm kind of having a conversation with an atheism, is actually I push them further into their atheism. I say, keep going. You are just a biological machine. You have no free will. You are not able to like make choices. You make choices just based on the programming that you have. Think about the implications of that. Everything is just power and preference in the world. And when you start to push atheists into that and they start to realize that those things are true, they start to realize that it doesn't align with what they actually experience in reality, and they begin to doubt their atheism. And I say that they bounce. You push them all the way down, and then they start to come back and they begin to look. And I think young men, especially, and I think YouTube is a big driver of this, that the new atheists push people down, and then, especially young men, and then all of a sudden, young men have gone, they ended up in this crappy place. And then Jordan Peterson shows up, and he's sort of the one who comes in and goes, hey, everybody, have you ever, like, do you realize our entire civilization is like built around these values from this crazy book with talking donkeys in it? Like, maybe we should actually take it a little bit more seriously. And when people do that, it has really powerful effects on them.
Yeah, and this is just being, descriptive, not necessarily prescriptive here. But the other thing too is, I was an atheist for 13 years. I was very much influenced by the new atheism. I was watching Alex O'Connor's when he was a snotty-nosed teenager, and
Me
so
too.
I was fascinated by all these different voices out there. And actually, I guess you could say I'm one of those people that found their way back into faith. And it's so fascinating to me, Jacob, is there's the amount of young men that reach out to me that in their like late teens, early 20s, that are having a faith crisis, or they're thinking of leaving the church, or they're thinking of joining the church. They come from an evangelical background, but they're thinking of becoming Mormon or going back the other way. And I can just tell that there's a hunger there for for truth and knowledge and wisdom, and if in our world has kind of left a lot of these young males unmoored, and they need something to latch onto. And I think that because atheism doesn't really replace anything, it just eliminates it and then
Yep.
replaces it with nothing. And I think
And,
that well, I don't want to be super like stereotypical here either, because I do defend atheism, but I understand even the necessity of atheism for certain people who have
yeah, I don't,
experienced spiritual and religious abuse.
uh-huh.
So I think that there's some good that can come out of atheism as well. So I don't condemn atheism. Honestly, I think there's some atheists that know the Bible better than many Christians do, and like I tell people,
Yes.
is that there are atheists there are atheists that will give me the shirt off their back, and then Christians who will stab me in the back. So,
Yes.
so I think people,
I don't, I think a lot of the problems that I have with atheism ultimately are philosophical. And like you said, especially with atheists who've grown up in certain traditions, like they have great moral compasses, and they're very moral and good people. Um, and so having this conversation with Alex was a bit of a challenge because again, I'm dealing with sort of the level 3 conversation. And I'm trying to do that with someone who doesn't, believe in God or Christ. And so I tried my best in the conversation to kind of say, hey, look, like, I get it. If you're a purely secular person, like, this is merely sort of a sociological phenomena. But I actually, and I tried to make this case that even from just a sociological perspective, and I think you can appreciate this as someone who's an outsider who's fascinated with the restoration, is that this is something fascinating, that this is something that has had a big impact on people's lives. And uh, and it's something that's worth understanding, even if it's just from a sociological perspective. And I think that an atheist can come to have a respect for Mormonism, or the restored gospel, in the same way that they have respect for Catholicism, even though they're not a believer in Catholicism or other Christian groups. And they can say, look, the Latter-day Saint tradition should be kept in with everybody else. It doesn't have to be written off. The way that, and they can, and to a weird degree, and this is where Alex and I have this sort of weird alliance where we both say, look, he says, well, Mormonism is crazy, and you can use the same sort of apologetics towards Christianity. And I'm sort of like, you're exactly right. They do use the same sort of apologetical strategies that we do, but that's actually because you as an atheist are being consistent and we as Latter-day Saints are being consistent, right? And so there's this sort of like this weird alliance where they, as an outsider, can say, hey, yeah, people shouldn't be picking on you guys as Latter-day Saints. When they have, you want to go into our history, it's like, okay, go into Catholic history. Go learn about Martin Luther's views on Jews.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, let's just be a little careful before we're all throwing rocks from our glass houses.
Yeah, I know. It's so true. And what I enjoyed about the interview, and and it was just it was an overview interview of Mormonism, if you will. And so I found it fascinating for Alex. He was kind of learning about Mormonism while he was interviewing you. And I just thought that was really fascinating for him. Just you could just see the wheels turning and like, aha, this is so. And he made the comment. He says, I think towards the end of the interview, he was like, why wouldn't you be interested in this? This is a fantastic story in and of itself. And I always tell people, like, outsiders, I said, have you read the story about Mormonism? It's truly remarkable. And especially as an American, and you don't know anything about this homegrown religion that had its own like biblical story take place in America, where you have this like pioneers going and settling in the desert, making the desert bloom. I mean, it's almost like it's a parallel to Old Testament stuff. I mean, so this is a remarkable story, and I appreciate that Alex appreciates that too. And it just so saddens me that quite frankly, because of bigotry, your story isn't often told because people are like he was talking about the one Christian apologist who, if given the opportunity, he would burn a Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, that gets to me so much that they would do that. And you got to keep in mind, I go to the same Publix years ago, right, for a long time, went to the same Publix that the guy that burned the Qurans, the pastor who burned those Qurans. I was freaking running into him at the Publix and seeing this guy. I was like, oh my gosh. And this is while I was an atheist. So at the time, I didn't want to have anything to do with that guy. But it just bewilders me to no end that these Christian apologists won't even, because been this really negative, dark stereotype that's been put on your people to make you almost to be satanic. It's caused a lot of people not to even engage with your story, which I think it needs to be told and be put out there.
And it's one of those ones that, like, look, in Christian history, if you want to take a particular view of Christian history, a very cynical view, Christian history can be something that you use as like, oh, these people are all bad and terrible, and the Christian movement is this horrible thing.
Yeah.
But actually, and me as someone who is not I'm not a Catholic, I'm not Orthodox, I'm not Protestant, I can look at the stories of those groups and find in like tons of interesting and inspiring stories of what people have done. And I think that there's a level of just sort of cultural respect that you have for different groups. And I actually want to tell this story of the Latter-day Saints. One of the big projects I'm working on right now is a multi-series basically telling the story of Joseph Smith. And then after that, I'm going to tell the story of Brigham Young. And I think by the end of this sort of two-volume or two-part kind of history that I'm giving, basically from Joseph Smith all the way until the end of polygamy, I think that when a person watches that story, again, I don't care if you believe it or not, you're gonna come away going, that's a wild story. Like this is some crazy stuff. But wait, you mean the Mormons were out like getting in skirmishes with the U.S. Army, scattering their cattle and stuff while there's a Missouri extermination order? And I think Alex, and that's like you said, Alex, I noticed that he got that. He understands that, like, even if you don't believe, you can find these really fascinating stories that are worth understanding, in my opinion. And I was trying to sort of convey that in the interview with him because, yeah, like I said, I think it's worth people understanding that.
I think so too. And I also think one of the things I like to kind of talk about is the parallel history of the evangelicals and with the restorations. Matter of fact, I'm going to have Stefan Tagger and Dr. Kyle Bashir are going to be coming on my program to talk about the history of even more positive interactions between evangelicals and Latter-day Saints, which is kind of an undertold story, including Dwight L. Moody, one of the most important evangelicals of the 19th century, speaking at the Tabernacle.
Yeah.
Those are important stories that we need to tell. But I tell people, I said, in many ways, one of the places that Mormonism was birthed was when that Presbyterian minister told the Smith family that Alvin is burning in hell because he did not receive a Presbyterian baptism.
Yep.
Now, I kind of say, like, when evangelicals really go after me, I'm like, listen, we have to kind of own this. Just speaking, we have to own the fact that that pastor said that, and he had no business saying that to them as well. That was way above his pay grade. But I think it was that kind of Christianity that he was engaging that caused Joseph to find a way to get Alvin into heaven, and in his own beautiful way did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so another thing that I brought up that people sort of took issue with, that is, I think, again, it's just part of this overall narrative of like taking this seriously. It's not every day that you have a religious institution like this with this kind of a story all of a sudden grow to 17 million people in 200 years.
Okay, and I want to talk to you about that too.
So, and I talking about like the growth rate stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I find that
So,
interesting. But
so let me, and
yeah,
I
please.
go, no, you go ahead. You had something
Okay.
to say on that.
Well, I actually want to. So often I hear this from Latter-day Saints as a kind of common thing, and just a few things I want to push back on that a little bit. Is
Mhm.
one, why do you ignore the Seventh-day Adventists? Because they're bigger than you and they're younger
No,
than you.
I wouldn't. And if
Okay.
I don't remember what I said. I remember I actually made a note to make sure that I said we are arguably
Okay.
the fastest growing
Yeah.
because because it depends on sort of how you cut the data
Right.
and
Okay.
and but my point though in it, whether we're number one, number two, number three, how you cut the data, my point on a sociological level is this, like, something's happening here. Like
Okay. That's fair.
this is
That's fair.
something like this thing has a big sort
Yeah.
of impact, whatever it is. It's not nothing because there's all sorts of people that come up with crazy ideas every other day. And I
Hmm.
think, again, if I'm put on my atheist hat for a minute, there is something to say. This one seems to be an outlier. And even within Seventh day Adventists or Presbyterians, for example, or I'm sorry, Pentecostals, which have grown enormously.
That's the second point I wanted to make. Okay, is that I argue that if you look at the 1906 Azusa Street Revival was the beginning of the Pentecostal slash charismatic movement. My parents got involved in the charismatic renewal movement in the 1960s.
Huh?
And now there are 500 million charismatic Pentecostals in the world. Now you have to understand the very same people that have attacked your church are the very same people that attacked our movement as well. When
Mm-hmm.
John Ankerberg was having more doing a thing on Mormonism in the 1980s, the next week he was doing a thing going after charismatics. So,
Yeah.
but that movement started in 1906 has 500 million adherents, and by the middle of next century of this century will be bigger than Islam. Now that's
So when it comes to the Pentecostal explosion, no, totally agree. Something big is going on there.
yeah.
With that in mind, the way I look at it, and again, this is me as an outsider, I look at within the Protestant house, there's shifts that are going on within that house.
Hmm.
Because I believe that the restoration is something that's outside of the house entirely.
Okay.
It's sort of like, for example, there's been massive shifts away from Calvinism, for example, within Protestantism since like a long time ago, or maybe towards or away from, right? But a theological shift within an existing house like Protestantism, to me, I would put that on sort of a different sort of category than I do within something that is really sort of outside of it entirely. Does that make
Yeah, okay.
sense?
It's fair, but I will only push back on some level to tell you that a lot of the people that said that Mormons are not Christians are the same people that said charismatics and Pentecostals are not Christian.
Yeah, and fair enough. I would say that I do think though that for the most part, the general opinion amongst Christendom is that Pentecostals still fall within sort of Christian orthodoxy because they do still adhere to Trinitarian
Yeah,
sort of formulations and things like that.
with the exception of oneness Pentecostals, that yeah, and you know that, but I just think it's important that yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think that like when I look at like if somebody's looking for a latter day move of God, I think a movement that's at a half a billion in just a little over a century and will
No,
be
and
bigger
I
than Islam is probably a latter day move of God.
and I would, and here's what I would say to people on that. I actually think that if you're an atheist, study both. Like these are both, anytime you have big sort of movements in religion, especially in the modern day, I think they're worth looking at and taking more seriously. Like as a non-Pentecostal, I'm very interested in understanding the nature of that movement. I'm not writing it off, right? And so my point that I'm trying to make when I talk about the numbers, like some people and even church leaders or members they'll kind of use this argument like, look, it's spreading, therefore it's true. That's a dumb argument. I think what the argument is to say something's happening here, right? Like I I don't I don't my goal is fairly modest. I just want people to take it a little more seriously, right? It's very easy, and I don't hold that just for everyone else, for myself as well. Like you need to take atheism a little bit more seriously. You need to take Pentecostalism more seriously. Like when there are large movements that happen, I think it's worth giving them serious attention. You know what I mean? Especially if they have very strong positive effects in the world. Because if we're trying to find things that create positive things in the world, even as an atheist, you have to look at some of these things and be like, hey, what can we learn from this about how to create positive change in people? That makes sense.
So I want to just you know you had said that there have been a lot of comments that have made and some and of course I put out a thing on Reddit yesterday for people to make comments on the video as well. I just thought maybe did you want to address some of the overall comments that were
Yeah,
put out to
yeah.
you?
I have some here that I thought maybe I would address that I think hit on some of the big points that I've been seeing.
Okay.
But just first off, I actually was surprised when I looked at the comments on Alex's video. When I look at the top comments, you can sort them by different things. The top comments have been pretty positive from people that are kind of never members. People just, and not necessarily people like being like, oh, Jacob's so smart and he proved Mormonism or something like that, but just, hey, this was a fascinating conversation. I'm glad that you guys were able to do this, stuff like that. So I think that whether people agreed or disagreed, they enjoyed the conversation, which I think there's something to be said for. Now, to some of the critiques, one of them that I know was put in the Reddit thread. I'll just read it. It says, "Why does Jacob think he has to so regularly obfuscate or mislead about Mormon beliefs in this interview? Is tithing a requirement for Latter-day Saints?" Jacob responds right out the gate, "No, it is not a requirement." Now, the tithing one got a lot of traction.
Mhm.
Okay, so I just want to clarify what I mean by this. So first of all, by requirement, I have to ask, what does a person mean by requirement? Maybe I should have asked Alex, like, what do you mean by requirement? Because if it's required that you pay tithing, then I would get kicked out of the church if I didn't pay my tithing. Like tithing settlement would be a much more intense thing instead of just hey, come on in and declare that you're a tithe payer for your own conscience sake. You know what I mean? And so In that sense, no, it's not a requirement. However, let's just scale back. And I thought I explained this in the interview. If you are a Christian, Christ expects you to be willing to give everything that you have, including your property. That's the parable or the story of the young rich man who was unwilling to give everything that he had, right? To follow Jesus. And so is it required to be willing to give everything you own to be a Christian? I would say the answer to that is probably yes. Now, within the church, we have we're trying to follow Jesus. And so what we say is if you want to follow Jesus and attain these blessings of that are available in temples, then you need to actually be living some standards of the church. And one of those standards is being willing to give to help build the kingdom of God. And I have no problem with that. I think that's great. I'm actually, one of the reasons I love tithing, I'm like a tithing fanatic, is because in my mind, what I'm doing has nothing to do with the money itself. It's my way of showing God that money is not as important to me as he is. Because if money is somehow more important, and it's sort of like, use the phrase, put your money where your mouth is. Like, are you actually willing to make a sacrifice for this? Or is this just a place you go to hang out on Sunday with some friends and like do your thing? And to me, it's like, and people might, Exmos, I like to kind of use this to troll a little bit, but if the church told me to take my money, put it on an altar and burn it, I'd do it. Because, that's what God required of the Israelites, take the firstlings of their flocks and to offer them as a sacrifice. To me, it's a chance to give a sacrifice to God, to show my commitment and to make sure that I'm not just in this for social reasons. Like I'm really committed to it and I'm willing to sacrifice for it.
Okay, well, that's interesting, and I do see your point. I would say that if there was a wealthy person who is a member or who claims to be a Christian but is unwilling to part with their wealth, I I would question whether they were, or anybody, in one sense. But it also there within the church rules, it even says like even destitute people should be giving a tithe. I mean,
Yeah.
do you think that's a principle that like in the third world country that that they can't feed their families, but they still should give 10%? I mean, how does that work?
I think in my mind, I would encourage, I stand 100% behind if you have to choose between feeding your children or paying your tithing, you pay your tithing. Now, what do I believe is going to happen if you're doing that? You're going to have a priesthood leader who's around who, again, I'm kind of putting all things are working properly here. The priesthood leader is not going to let that family go hungry. They have an obligation themselves as a priesthood leader, and all of the priesthood and members in that area have an obligation to go and care for that family. It's a sort of communism in a way without the force of the state. It's the law of consecration that was lived in the New Testament where look, if you will be taken care of ultimately by the church and kingdom and the members if you can't afford to feed your family. Now, if the church literally isn't doing that or something, yeah, I can understand why people might not due to imperfections of men, but the faith that you have is that if you give your 10%, the Lord will always make sure that you're taken care of. And I'm a believer in that.
Okay. Any more comments that you want to address?
Yeah. Let's do one. Another one that came up had to do with sort of why Jacob.
Hmm.
Like why the heck is Jacob Hansen? And I have to kind of admit there is something about this. Like everyone needs to know. And there are people like, oh, Jacob does this for a living. I don't do this for a living. I'm just a dad. Like I'm just a normal member of the church who's interested in these subjects, who likes to speak about them. I'm a seminary teacher, a calling. Like I'm not a professional seminary teacher. Like I was given that calling from the stake president to go and teach young kids about the scriptures every day in the mornings. Like, why me? And I've often asked that myself. Why me? Like, why aren't these other people doing that? Now, partly Um, uh, Partly it has to do with the fact that I think for scholars who are credentialed kind of academics, this is their career. It is extremely high risk. It was high risk for me to go onto a platform with someone who's that sharp, who can really make you look dumb in an interview. And having a public conversation with someone is always risky. And it's not everyone's skill set. It's high risk. And if you're a scholar and you have a bad conversation, it can mess up your career. So that's why a lot of the scholars don't want to go. And this is kind of, what they'd rather do is, write papers and do things like that in other forums where they're not engaging publicly live. Does that make sense? And so part of it is just that I'm the one who's willing to do that. And it is risky. You have to be careful in how you do it, because just having a conversation with someone, there are all sorts of dynamics, power dynamics in conversations. Like right now, if I were to start grilling you on your show, that's like not the way it's supposed to work, right? But you as the interviewer, if you want to ask me I'm in the hot seat here.
Mm-hmm.
Like technically you're the cross-examiner, I'm on the witness stand.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust you enough, Steve, to be fair and do this, in a good way. Mm-hmm. But if you wanted to, you could begin to hammer me on this. Now, that's why I'm also big on debates. It's like, look, if Steve, you and I want to fight over an issue, well, then let's create a dynamic where we both have to sit on the stand for part of it, and we both have to answer questions, and we pick a topic that we're going to narrow it down to so that it can be fair. I mean, just so everyone knows, I just went on with one of the most brilliant people who just will rip people apart with the smoothest British accent you ever heard for 2 hours to talk about. He said, here's what I want to discuss. I want to discuss the history of Mormonism, the theology of Mormonism, and the controversies of Mormonism. In other words, I want to put you, Jacob Hansen, in the freaking witness stand, and the risk that he could have spent that entire time trying to annihilate me. He didn't. He asked some hard questions. We went back and forth, but it was incredibly intense for me to do that sort of an interview. And it takes a ton of trust that we're going to have a good conversation, because if I brought Alex O'Connor in and I sat him down and I grilled him on atheism for 2 hours as hard as I could, I think I could do very, very well against him. And he's like the best in the world. And so when you are, so the dynamics of a conversation really matter. And why Jacob? Well, Jacob is the one who's actually like sort of willing to engage publicly in both debates and in conversations with people, much more so than maybe people who have a lot more to lose than I do.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Any more questions or comments that you wanted to address?
One more. The Book of Abraham was obviously, it's always a tough point.
Yep.
I just want to let everyone know, first of all, and I admitted it to Alex, I think the Book of Abraham is the hardest subject within the Restoration. There's a reason the critics this is where they go every time.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the questions that someone asked, what does Jacob say when it is pointed out that his apologetics are factually false? For example, he recently had a spectacle where he was defending the Book of Abraham and pointed out a page from the Gale, the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language, is not in Joseph Smith's handwriting. When shown a correction, he never gave an actual verbal correction of the facts. Why can't he issue an actual correction? Okay, I don't know, people that maybe didn't watch my video that I re-released on this. At the end of it, I do explain what I got wrong, and I'll explain it right now. Okay, Cameron Bertuzzi put out a video showing one of the documents from the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language. He made 2 claims about this document. One, he said it was in Joseph Smith's handwriting. And then number 2 is he said that on the right-hand side of the page was the text of the Book of Abraham. Now, I thought that he got both claims wrong. I thought that the Gale, or that page, because the Gale, there's a whole bunch of them and there are a bunch of different handwritings. I thought that the page that he had was not in Joseph's handwriting. I thought it was in W.W. Phelps. I was wrong about that. But I was correct on the other point that this isn't the Gale of Joseph's stuff with the Book of Abraham translation. Now, this topic is very, very, like, we could spend forever on that, and I'm not the one to have that conversation. But I do know that there was a factual error that Cameron had made, but then I made a factual error when I said that it wasn't in Joseph's handwriting. And so I did issue a correction on that, and I said that, hey, this document is in Joseph's handwriting, but Cameron is wrong in his claim that the text on the right hand side of the page was the Book of Abraham text.
I'm just curious, I'm just curious in general. Have you studied Dr. Rittner's work on the Book of Abraham as well as Dan Vogel's work?
I have, although it is a, I would say yes, but not like in tons of depth. And I would say that on both sides. The Book of Abraham Apologetics is one that I'm currently sort of exploring myself, which is why I want to be careful that I don't say too much. What I do with all of it is I say there are, if somebody wants to debate the Book of Abraham with me, I'm not going to do it. I will debate topics that I feel like I have sufficient knowledge on to have a very firm position that I want to defend. When it comes to the Book of Abraham, I don't have that yet. And so I would rather people talk to Stephen Smoot or other people that have stronger positions and a better understanding of it. With that in mind, I then zoom out, which is what I kind of did with Alex. I say, look, on one hand, I fully want to recognize that if people have doubts about this, that's fine. I also want to recognize that people make exaggerated claims about it, such as that the catalyst theory is just like an impossibility. I think that that's going too far. I think if people say that the missing scroll theory, or I'll put it this way, there are things that people say about the missing scroll theory, or people say certain things like Cameron Bertuzzi that aren't correct. And the issue is a little more complicated than people will say. And that's why people like Rittner or like Vogel or like Smoot or like Gee, it's sort of like I would point people to them to get sort of the experts battling out their different opinions on these things. I'm not really the one to debate that particular topic, but I will say this, that it does sort of seem one-sided when people want to say, well, we have the source text of the Book of Abraham, and so it's a false thing, when that's a debated thing, where on the other hand, everyone sort of agrees that we do have now the Book of Enoch, and no one ever seems to want to talk about the parallels that are in there, and which I think are very interesting and like powerful evidence for. So while the Book of Abraham absolutely can cause doubt, I still look at it and I say, I don't look at the Book of Abraham all by itself, right? Just like the resurrection. Let's use that as an example. If someone were to say, hey, somebody rose from the dead, that's an insane claim. So it's like, why do you believe it? Well, because of all these other things. And it's the same way with me for the Book of Abraham. I acknowledge it's on the doubt side of the scale, but I still feel like I have enough on the other side of the scale that this thing isn't a defeater. It is something that, again, maybe it's a catalyst, and I'm fine with that sort of explanation. So when I'm dealing with the Book of Abraham, I feel if people feel like I'm running away, there's part of me that's like, yeah, sort of,
Yeah.
because I'm not the expert in it, and I do agree that it's an area of doubt. I know why you're hammering it, because you want to show that this is why you don't believe, and I want to say that I can see why people might be that way. I don't get there all the way myself, and I think that there's lots of other reasons that account for some of this stuff. And so, yeah, why would I want to spend time on the areas that are the most doubtful when I think we're not sufficiently addressing areas of belief? So that's my rant.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. And I noticed you didn't mention Hugh Nibley as a source on the Book of Abraham. Is there a reason for that?
No, I wouldn't. Again, I've read some of Nibley's stuff on it.
Okay.
I'm not familiar enough with it. So for people that are out there, um, again, I'm not your guy. for the debate on this. I have things to say. I have things where maybe I see someone make a statement that's factually incorrect, and I'll correct the record. But as someone who is agnostic as to what the best explanation is, it's hard for me to come out with a really solid stance.
Jacob, I want to thank you for bringing that up because actually that's an area that I've been trying to tackle, and I can't seem to get anybody to come on and defend the Book of Abraham. And so if you could find me somebody that could come on and defend the Book of Abraham, I'd love to have that conversation because it does seem like an area that people are kind of leery about even talking about.
Yeah, no, and I'm happy to do that. Um, one other area, if you're okay, moving on to the
Yeah,
next
absolutely.
topic here, was from sort of the Christian side of it, right? So a good portion of this did talk about the Trinity and some of the doctrines around that. And one of them said, the discussion about the creeds is fascinating. Dogma is enforced, not supported by argument. Such an amazing insight from a religious person. This is an atheist, obviously, kind of saying like, "Hey, that was an interesting thing they hadn't heard before." Now, Gavin Ortland, who is a Christian, he made a video. He actually very well known Protestant, made a video same day about this very notion of the Trinity, and it being something that kind of goes all the way back into the kind of very beginnings of the church, and that these ideas are in the Bible, though they're not fully sort of fleshed out until later philosophy and things like that. So I didn't really see, and people could check out his video.
Yeah, so I
Uh,
just pulled it up for everybody here. So this is Gavin
okay.
Ortland. He's a evangelical apologist, and he just put out a video this morning referring to that. So I think it's good. I think you starting a conversation in the Christian world. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and honestly, like I said, I'm less interested in having conversations with atheists, whether they be big name atheists or even ex-Mormon atheists. I'm very interested in talking about Christianity when I talk about Mormonism. If I was going to talk with an ex-Mormon who's an atheist, I want to talk about level one, unless they're willing to talk to kind of grant Christianity and go from there. Because everything changes when you get to this point that you're like, that guy rose from the dead.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you have a whole different set of questions you're asking.
Hmm.
Um, and so I want to hopefully have more conversations with big name Christians that are out there, because obviously I'm just a clout shark and that's all I'm looking for. With what, by the way, just so everyone knows, yes, I'm a clout shark in the sense that I would like to grow my audience and share these ideas that I have with others because I think that they bless their lives. And I think that we have something worth saying. And that's the reason that all of us that are on YouTube doing this are doing it, is because we actually believe, like, we all want our audiences to grow.
So
And I
you're
would
saying
like,
we're just doing this just to get views and subscribers, and that's what this is all about?
yeah, because, well, I'll say, yes, you want to get the subscribers in that, because hopefully, well, I hope this, I hope you're not just doing it to be popular. I hope you're actually doing it because you actually believe in something,
Hmm.
like the mission of your channel. Like, your channel has a mission, and you're stoked to get new people that listen because it allows you to continue the mission of your channel and accomplish it even better than you thought before. And so my mission, I would say, I mean, I have kind of my official mission statement, but currently I feel like one of my big missions is to enter the Christian conversation that's going on online and begin to hopefully help people to see that we have something interesting to say. You don't have to believe it, but to just throw us out as like, you don't even belong here, I don't find any good reasons for them to say that. And one of the things I think we have a lot to say about is about the nature of God. And so I'm hoping that I can continue to sort of address this, because um, those who, and you can push back on this too, Steve, I'll let you push back a little more. You're a Christian, so I'm a little bit more open to, having these sorts of things, is this idea of the Trinity. He seems historically to be um, a later development that is an attempt to understand the Bible through the lens of a particular type of hard rational monotheism that emerged in the Greek thought world. Um, and I think that's a very interesting story because we get attacked a lot as Latter-day Saints because we have a different conception of God and the relationship between Jesus and the Father and all of that. And I'm kind of like, that's fine. You can disagree with us, but you to just say that we don't have anything, like we don't have an argument here. It's just obvious that the Trinity is like biblical. I think that's a conversation to have. I don't think that's a settled matter.
I think it's a conversation worth having. I agree with you because I actually, and I think a lot of people would even agree with me on this, is that the early Christians were arguably binitarian, and that the Trinitarian view evolved from binitarianism. The concept of the Trinity would have been, I think, and I think the evidence would back this, would have been a foreign concept to the early church, to the very first um, people who joined the church, who became converts to the church. And so,
Agreed.
so for me, this is where it gets a little tricky because, people, I've been accused of saying that Mormons are Christians, and I've never actually said that. I've said that the Mormonism is a branch. I consider it a type of heterodox Christianity. It's
Mm-hmm.
not Orthodox, it's
Yeah.
heterodox. But I'd say that I think you can't say that it's one of those things where I look at it and say, look, I am come from a creedal tradition. I come from a Dutch Reformed background on both sides of the family. So we were pretty strong creedal people growing up. And I choose to latch myself onto creedal Christianity because that's the Christianity that I was raised with. However, I have a hard time believing that if your belief in the Trinity is what makes you a Christian or enables you to get to heaven, then you would have to say that a lot of the early Christians would not be in heaven because they didn't accept the Trinity. So that's where I think is the difficult part. I think that the Trinity is man's attempt to try to understand God.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, look, these creeds, they're not scripture. They may be based on scripture, but it's still through the interpretation lens of men, flawed
Yeah.
men.
And
And so I
and
think it's really important that we're trying to come up with the best explanation, but then to make that another level of what it'll allow you to go to heaven or hell based on your acceptance of the creeds. I think that's putting something on Christianity that wasn't there in the beginning.
yeah, and amen. I think that there's a real question that exists about where the proper bounds of orthodoxy. Now, one of the things that Latter-day Saints have that is very, very different, like there's a problem in sort of the creedal tradition, is so far as I can tell, of figuring out where these bounds of orthodoxy is, because orthodoxy is sort of the game, at least for a lot of Christians, that is the game of like you go to heaven or hell based on if you're worshiping the right Jesus, as it were,
Yeah.
right? In other words, theology isn't like orthodoxy is incredibly important. It's a matter of salvation. If
Yeah.
you're worshiping the wrong Jesus, you go to hell. See,
Hmm.
Latter-day Saints have this weird different where we look at that, we're like, we don't even care that much about your theology. We do have some theological minimums that we believe that like, but for us, it's more about have you have you made a covenant with Christ? And are you seeking to live that covenant in your life? If you have some ideas about God that aren't quite right, like that is a problem, but it isn't like a salvific problem, as it were. And so, but also to the Christians who are like, well, no, um, right theology doesn't really matter. Well, then it's sort of like, well, then why can't I just be a Latter-day Saint? Like if the theology doesn't really matter that much, then I'll just go with the non-Trinitarian formula and I'll be saved all the same.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to me. I remember this, I read this decades ago that there was at one of the colleges at the Vatican, they had these priests do this, write up the what tell us what the Trinity means or what it is. And then something like 80% of them failed, that they were actually giving a heretical view of the
Yep.
Trinity. So even
Modalism
then
or
this is the big problem, is if you don't have, does this extend to, are you going to heaven because you have a proper understanding of the Trinity? Because if you don't have a proper understanding of the Trinity, does that mean you're going to hell? Or is it because you go to a church that teaches the Trinity, but you don't believe it or understand it or couldn't articulate it? How does that work? That's the issue. That's where the rub for me is like, is it the building that you're going to that teaches the Trinity that saves you, or is it the work that Jesus did on the cross and me coming and saying the sinner's prayer? And like you have said, Jacob, you've said the sinner's prayer,
Yeah.
and and asking Jesus Christ to come into your life and be your Lord and Savior. And so to me, that's more important than just about anything.
Well, and here's one of the things that really makes people, I think, nervous about Latter-day Saint theology is because when we say to people, if you get to this point where you're like, look, what matters is that Jesus transforms you from the inside out, and that you can sort of tell by their fruits, right? You shall
Hmm.
know them, that
Yep.
by their fruits there are these things that come out. So if you as a Christian move into this space of like, what really matters is Jesus working in you, and is that manifesting in fruits in the world? Well, then you start going, that's a testable claim. You can say, okay, well, what Christian groups are producing Christian fruits? And when Latter-day Saints show up really, really high in that equation, you start going, well, wait a minute. That means being a Latter-day Saint is a very, very viable option here. And so a lot of cradle Christians, I think, go, then that can't be right. What has to matter, the fruits don't matter, the theology has to matter, because Mormons have good fruits, but their theology is bunk. Therefore, they're not going to be saved because of their theology, even though their fruits are good, right?
Hmm.
And so it creates this tension for a lot of Christians, I think, who, man, they get to know us and they're like, these people are going to hell. Like, this is just, it's really weird to me that God would send these people who have this book that talks all about Jesus Christ, that encourages them to live a Christian life, and then they go and do it. And it all seems really good, but it's like, nope, they're going to hell because wrong Jesus. It's like, and so I think again, this is one of those things that from when you move into level 2 and you're a Christian, Mormonism begins to be something that you have to take a lot more seriously for a variety of reasons. And I think what can happen sometimes with atheists like Alex O'Connor is that they can recognize that as an outsider, and they can sort of be like, they almost enjoy it because they're like, hey, I can kind of take these Latter-day
Oh
Saints
yeah.
and I can use them to show where the Christians are kind of
Yep.
have issues here. And
Yep.
we're over there going, yeah, do
Hmm.
it. Like we appreciate that. So there's this, but then at the same time, I also want to say we also turn around with the Christians, and I'm willing to go to battle and debate Alex O'Connor and say that his ideas about, about morality and all of that are just absolutely insane and don't line up with the way he lives his own life.
So I want to echo Rabbi Tova Singer, who said God created Mormons to show Christians what it's like to feel like a Jew. In other words, this...
What is that thing? I heard someone say that a nickname for Latter-day Saint are mountain Jews.
Mountain Jews. I love it. That's great. I love it.
uh,
I did want to start wrapping this up, Jacob, and I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for reaching out to me yesterday and giving me the opportunity to be the very first person to interview you about this interview that happened yesterday. It is a privilege, and I didn't even reach out to you. You reached out to me, and I just want to thank you for doing that.
yeah. Well, Steve, I feel like you're someone who is fair with people, who lets kind of everybody give their different points of view. And also, I didn't want to take this interview with Alex and then go and just immediately sort of parade it around as like, I wanted to actually, because I know you have a lot of people that are ex-members and things who watch this show. I wanted to reach out to them because I know that they had a lot of concerns and things they were going to say. And I wanted to sort of let them know that, look, if you felt like I didn't get into all the nuances of all the topics and everything, like I was trying my best to just get through any one of those topics that we went through. I mean, we talked about blacks in the priesthood. We talked about Book of Mormon DNA. We talked about, the apostasy. We went through so much that could be an entire series of videos that of course I couldn't get into all the nuance and the details. But I tried my best to give a faithful Latter-day Saint perspective from my own point of view on who we are and what we believe to someone who's a non-believer. And so I hope you can grant me a little grace if I wasn't perfect in all my responses or if I made some error, I'll correct it. But I, I wanted to make sure that people know that I do see your comments and things. I do recognize them, and I appreciate that. And I'm down for further conversations with people of all sorts of different views.
I actually just want to ask, I was just thinking this just popped in my mind, so I just wanted to ask you this. What would you say, like, you've been doing this for a while now, you've been in the marketplace of ideas, you've been debating, you've been getting pushback, and you've had these conversations. What would you say is one of the more stronger uh, views or arguments, if you will, that have been made against you or your beliefs that you would say like, yeah, that's a pretty good point. That's pretty strong. Can you think of something off the top of your head that you like
Um,
over the course of this is
about
like, hey, I never thought of that, or that's a good point.
um, yeah, I can say to some extent. I do want to try and be better about this. I've tried to be good about this, but if I sometimes make the mistake of attacking people instead of ideas, I am aware of that, and there is a fine line between a person and their ideas. Um, and I'm human just like anybody else, so I have my emotions, and if someone is really coming after me, it's like, maybe I lash back out, right? And so, um, and I also want to be careful that I don't come across as callous when it comes to like genuine sort of faith struggles that people have. Um, I know people that have had those. I myself have had to kind of look into the abyss, um, and have those kinds of concerns. And I want to empathize with people who do, like, if your faith fell apart, that's a rough, life altering thing. And I don't, if I vent frustration, it's towards sort of people that are angry and that I can tell are lashing out in anger and resentment. And maybe I respond not well to that sometimes, but I don't want to minimize the real struggles that people do have. Um, and and if I do, I apologize. I don't want to do that. But I also know that there are people that will weaponize empathy to push agendas, and I generally don't stand for that. So I to those that are sincerely struggling, like, you have a friend in me, and what I do online is I'm trying to combat ideas that I believe are false to the best of my ability. Um, but I even have it on my website as part of my mission. It's attack ideas, not people. Or I say hard on ideas, soft on people. And I hope that I can do that. And that's why a lot of times I want people to actually come on and like talk to me, who have real issue with me, is because it's like, let's see if we can actually like be opponents instead of enemies. I don't have a problem with opponents. I have a lot of opponents. I want to have as few enemies as possible.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving us that perspective, Jacob. It's always appreciated. And so just real quick, folks, I want to actually do the share screen real quick one last time so that people can see to check out these different videos that have been put out. Now, first of all, check out the Gavin Ortland uh, response to yesterday's video. Also, if you go on YouTube, this is the Alex O'Connor channel. And he's been doing this for quite a while. He's got other channels, but there is his Within Reason podcast episodes. And Jacob is the latest one with 108,000 views. If I hit refresh, it'd probably be more than that at this point. And and I also want to thank the people on Reddit who gave some, and Jacob's answered some of the questions. We had a nice little conversation yesterday on Reddit. I do want to say that Mormon Reddit is, I do appreciate that space. I think that it's a good mix of both critics and also faithful Latter-day Saints. So I want to thank the people over at Mormon for participating in this conversation as well. Jacob, thanks again for having coming on the show. Any final words?
No, just thank you, Steve, and keep doing what you're doing. You're a great asset in this world of online conversations.
Thank you, Jacob. Really appreciate it. And of course, this conversation we want to continue. So make sure you leave comments on this video. I read all the comments. I try to read all of them. Sometimes I don't get to all of them, and I try to. And I am very fascinated by what people have to say. I'd also like for those of you who are on Reddit, if you want to comment and start a thread on Reddit, we can do that as well. I'm always fascinated to hear feedback from people as well. And I have links in the description to all the videos that we talked about today, and also links for those of you who'd like to financially support this channel. Could not do it without you. And just remember, this is the most important thing. All the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.